What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in this video I'm going to be going through my week 6 tight end start sits. So talking about every single fantasy relevant tight end, listing them as either a start, fringe option, or a sit. The starts are players you feel very confident throwing into your lineup week to week. Now the bar is a little bit low for the tight end position just because of how thin it is, but you kind of get the point. Fringe options, these are players you probably don't love. There's a lot of these at the tight end position, but you could end up sliding them into your tight end one spot, whether they're on a good offense with some touchdown upside, maybe they're running a solid number of routes. For whatever reason, these guys have some value in your fantasy lineups. And then sits, these are players you'd prefer to keep on your bench. Let's just dive right into the first matchup. We have the Broncos taking on the Chiefs. And for the Broncos, I have Adam Troutman listed as a sit. I also believe Greg Dulcich can come off of IR. He went on after week 1, so he could come off here for this week 6 game. I'm a big fan of Greg Dulcich. Not saying you would want to play him this week if he does come off, but just someone to look out for. If you're in a super deep league or just like a super competitive league where there's like no tight end options, Greg Dulcich is someone who could potentially have some value moving forward if he gets the opportunity to get on the field. Now, Sean Payton has not exactly been like the most reliable option in getting his young, talented guys on the field. We've seen Marvin Mims struggle to really get out there. But if Dulcich does get the opportunity, he could be interesting, but obviously not for this week. Then for the Chiefs, you continue to fire up Kelsey as the tight end 1 overall. Very scary moment early on in that Chiefs game. It looked like he could miss a substantial amount of time, but then he ends up coming back in and puts together a really strong overall fantasy day. So you continue to fire up Travis Kelsey. Then moving over to Sunday, we have the Ravens taking on the Titans. Mark Andrews with a fine fantasy day. Could have been better. I think he had at least 2, maybe 3 drops. One of them was for a touchdown, so not a great like real life NFL day for Mark Andrews, but still, top 2, top 3 fantasy tight end moving forward. And then for the Titans, sitting Chigo Okonkwo, just not enough consistency there out of him at that tight end position. Then we're going to have the Commanders taking on the Falcons. Logan Thomas is coming off of a monster game on Thursday Night Football. There's not many tight ends, especially like fringe options or sits, that are going to be able to deliver that type of ceiling. So Logan Thomas's route involvement is really strong. If he can deliver that type of game, he's going to be a fringe option. And then for the Falcons, we finally had a big-time Kyle Pitts game, by far the best game of the season for him. He was targeted 11 times, caught 7 of them for 87 yards. This was probably Desmond Ridder's best game of the season. He kind of got let down by actually his position players, not actually him this time. So if Ridder can keep this up, Kyle Pitts becomes interesting. Hopefully he starts to string these together. I don't think we can throw him in as a start just yet, because it was kind of an outlier performance with Ridder playing well. Not sure if we can rely on that week to week. So he will be a fringe option, but it definitely was good to see out of Kyle Pitts. Then we're going to have a divisional matchup between the Vikings and the Bears. For the Vikings, you continue to fire up TJ Hawkinson as a start. If Jefferson misses time, Hawkinson could end up commanding even more volume here against the Bears. And then for the Bears, Cole Kmet's going to be a fringe option. Back-to-back really strong fantasy performances. He's getting into the end zone. His routes aren't great, but they're enough where he can command some kind of volume. And just the fact that he's been very involved the last 2 weeks, got to feel decent about throwing him into your lineup. Next matchup is going to be between the Seahawks and the Bengals. And Noah Fant has actually put together like 3 decent fantasy games. You really just can't trust him, though, because they're riding a full-on tight end by committee there with the Seahawks, so he will be a sit. I think he has the talent to be startable in the right situation, but that situation is just not what he's in right now. Then for the Bengals, Irv Smith, really just nothing going on there at the tight end position for the Bengals. Then we're going to have the 49ers taking on the Browns. And for George Kittle, he had a really disappointing first 4 weeks of the season, but this is why I just kept listing him as a start, because he has a very low weekly floor, but his weekly ceiling is crazy high, like we saw last week, or what was that, Sunday night. 3 receptions, 3 touchdowns, monster fantasy game. The floor, like I said, is not going to be there. So 1 week he might go out there, score 5 points, 6 points, but then he has that 20-plus point just boom ceiling, and you just can't sit that on your bench. And then for the Browns, David Njoku is going to be a fringe option for me. We'll see what he looks like after the bye week. We'll see how Deshaun Watson looks. It'll be interesting to see how the Browns handle this impressive 49ers defense. So you don't love Njoku, but he's a fine option. That's going to lead us into the Saints taking on the Texans. For the Saints, really not a ton going on at the tight end position. Juwan Johnson's injured. Taysom Hill hasn't been overly involved, so he's going to be a sit. And then for the Texans here, I have Dalton Schultz as a fringe option. He had been relegated to a sit, but his routes actually bounced back up here in week 5. So week 4, even though he had an impressive game, his routes actually, or his route participation fell below 50%. He got back up to like 71%, which isn't great, but it's fine, especially if he's going to be involved. We'll see if he's able to maintain that usage moving forward. I'm not overly optimistic that he can, but you could do worse in your starting tight end spot than someone who's had really impressive back-to-back games. Next matchup is between the Colts and the Jaguars. For the Colts, they're rolling with a full-on tight end by committee, going to be sitting Kylan Granson. And then for the Jaguars, I like Evan Ingram as a start here. I think he's a pretty decent buy low if you're desperate at the tight end position. He is very involved week to week. Like, his targets are solid. He just hasn't had a huge boom game, and he hasn't gotten into the end zone, so that's kind of capped his fantasy ceiling. But he has a very high weekly floor, and I think I've been pretty impressed with what I've seen out of him through the first 5 weeks. Plus, like, just in general, Trevor Lawrence has been playing at a very high level, but it hasn't necessarily translated to like huge fantasy production because the touchdowns haven't really been there. Those touchdowns should come, and Evan Ingram, should be the beneficiary of at least a few of those. Next matchup, pretty much nothing at the tight end position. Panthers taking on the Dolphins, sitting Hayden Hurst and sitting Durham Smythe. 2 pretty clear calls on that one. Then we're going to have the Patriots taking on the Raiders. I have Hunter Henry as a fringe option. He had a really impressive week 1 and week 2. He's probably picked up in pretty much every league to be like a decent tight end start, like a streaming option. He's definitely come back down to earth over the past 3 weeks, and then he ends up putting up a goose egg here in week 5. He still has fine weekly involvement. This Patriots offense has just been rough, but I mean, like, 3 startable games out of 5 is still fine for the tight end position. So I still think he's like a tight end 2, probably a high end tight end 2. But obviously he has not been able to maintain his impressive start. For the Raiders, we started to see Michael Mayer get a little bit more involved in this offense, which was encouraging. He had pretty much been a complete non-factor through the first, 4 games of the season. Week 5, he made some plays. We'll see if his role starts to expand, but right now we have to have him as a sit here. Then we're going to go to the Lions taking on the Buccaneers. And Sam Laporta has been a fantastic hit at the tight end position. I mean, he's locked in, top 4 guy rest of season. You got Kelsey, Andrews, Hawkinson. He's right in there. Some people may actually prefer him over a Hawkinson or an Andrews. For me, I'm not there yet. But, I mean, you got to feel great. He was someone who was like a late-round pick, maybe even got him off of waivers. So you continue to fire him up as a great option. Then for the Buccaneers, sitting Cade Otton. Just really not a ton going on here at the tight end position. The next matchup is between the Cardinals and the Rams, and I have both of these tight ends as fringe options. For Zach Ertz, got into the end zone, not a huge day volume-wise in Week 5, but he continues to run routes on a solid percent of dropbacks. You just keep firing him up as someone who should be involved week to week, probably like a back-end tight end 1 at this point. And then for the Rams, Tyler Higbee didn't do much in terms of like fantasy production. Cooper Kupp making his return, maybe it affected his usage. It really didn't. He put together a really impressive route participation. So even though there's another guy stealing targets, that type of usage on a passing attack that should be pretty strong, I definitely still think he's like a fringe-worthy player. Also a plus matchup here against the Cardinals. I think the Rams could put together a really strong passing day. The next game is going to be between the Eagles and the Jets, and after Dallas Goedert was very disappointing through the first 4 weeks, he went out with a massive Week 5 game. So I think he's, worth it to jump back into this start area. I still don't think he's like a super strong start. Like if we're talking about like the bar to be ranked as a start, he's probably pretty close to the bottom just because he has a very low weekly floor. And even with this huge game, I still don't think he has like this super realistic, massive weekly ceiling. But he's on a good offense. Just coming off a big game, I do think he deserves that start designation. On the other side for the Jets, Tyler Conklin hasn't been terrible. I just have a really hard time trusting anyone on this passing attack that's not named Garrett Wilson, especially just because the floor is so low for a lot of those guys. Moving over to the Sunday night game, we have the Giants taking on the Bills, and Darren Waller with a big-time bounce-back performance. Even in a game where the offense struggled, Waller still commanded a lot of volume. put together a very strong fantasy day. It looks like he's still going to be operating as their number one target. So even on a bad offense, that's a very fine role to have, especially at the tight end position. That becomes very, very valuable. So someone I'd still feel confident starting. And then on the other side for the Bills here, I was someone who admittedly was very high on Kincaid heading into the season. When it came to like those late round tight end darts, he was someone I liked, just kind of taking a shot on in those later rounds. And it looked like things were kind of trending in the right direction. He significantly outsnapped Dawson Knox in week 4, so you think that would be a good sign heading into week 5. Then we see Kincaid get outsnapped by Dawson Knox in week 5. So neither of these guys really has like a locked-in set role, which is obviously concerning if you're trying to play them for fantasy football. So they're both going to be sits. Really just not a good start for Dalton Kincaid. He hasn't had a double-digit fantasy performance in PPR, so definitely a huge disappointment. At this point, he may be able to expand his role, but I really thought this was a prime opportunity to come in from week 1 and make an impact, and that has not happened. And then moving over to the final game of the week, Cowboys taking on the Chargers. Nothing crazy going on with Jake Ferguson, but he just consistently is involved week to week. Didn't command a ton of volume. I think he had 3 targets on Sunday Night Football, but previous weeks he's been able to command a lot of volume on an offense that should be good. I know they struggled against the 49ers, but a lot of teams do. I like Jake Ferguson as probably like a low-end tight end 1. And then looking at the Chargers here, I do think it'll be interesting to see how the Chargers kind of use their weapons coming out of the bye. Right, Mike Williams on IR. They had a week to kind of recoup. I say that because through the first 4 weeks, they were kind of using a tight end by committee approach where Everett and Parham were splitting routes. Neither guy had a super strong role, so even though they had some touchdown upside, it was really tough to rely on either of them when they have a sub 50% route participation. But I wonder if the injury to Mike Williams makes them operate with more 2 tight end sets, which could open up some fantasy opportunities for Everett and Parham. I definitely don't want to bank on that, like heading into this week 6 game, but just something to kind of monitor throughout the rest of the season or over the next couple of weeks. But that is going to wrap it up for every single week 6 tight end matchup. If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button. I have all my other start-sit videos posted, so running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks. Go check those out. Any questions, drop them down below. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.